Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Monday, November 14th, 2016. There's a lot of news to comment on today. And let me remind you, my daily free news and comment podcast is now available on YouTube. That makes it accessible on all kinds of smartphones and other devices. Go ahead and spread the word. If you go to the YouTube page, just search for Peter B. Collins, and you'll find the podcast, and you can click on the subscribe button, and that'll expand my community and also give you notifications when we post a new podcast. So there is a lot to talk about. President-elect Trump gave an interview on 60 Minutes last night. We'll get to that in a moment. Hillary Clinton is assessing why she lost. We'll cover some of those issues. But I think it's important to point out, and I'm not taking back any of my criticism of candidate Clinton, her campaign, her ties to the establishment, her self-inflicted wounds over the emails, the foundation, and other matters. But I think it's important to look at the big picture. And Barack Obama operated as President of the United States in a manner that made it very difficult for any Democrat to win election following his second term. And I wanted to list the ways, and I started to make a list, and I've come up with 9 that I think are significant. Let me know what you think. One of the president's biggest blunders that hurt him from day one was the grandstanding promise that he was going to close Guantanamo. And just like Bill Clinton's blunder on day one in 1993, when he promised he was going to allow gays to serve openly in the military, and then his own party rebuffed him on it. Sam Nunn, the conservative Democrat and a very powerful leader at the time from Georgia, led the charge to prevent Bill Clinton from completing that campaign promise. And we ended up with the 19-year, very awkward don't ask, don't tell substitute. So on his day 2, Barack Obama signed an executive order, which was aspirational, hoping for the closure of Guantanamo. And like Bill Clinton before him, he didn't check with his Democratic colleagues. He didn't count the votes to see if he could sustain this campaign promise. And he not only will fail to close Guantanamo, and I'll be happy if I'm wrong about that in the next, 70 days? But he has left it open in a manner that allows Donald Trump to say he's going to put new prisoners there. He's going to restart the torture regime. And he doesn't care if it works. He believes it does. But he thinks they deserve it. And this is ignorance compounded. Torture doesn't work. Most of the people at Guantanamo didn't deserve it. Most of them have never been tried or charged. And this, I think, cast a pall over the president from day one. Then he instructed Eric Holder of the Justice Department and others to pursue no investigations or prosecutions for war crimes or for torture. Now, he says that he banned torture, but he would not prosecute those who had clearly broken those laws. This allowed the Republicans to attack Obama with impunity, because they paid no price for their past mistakes. And similarly, the president really extracted no penalties from the people who wrecked our economy, who sit atop the Wall Street banking firms and other financial institutions. And his failure to prosecute those largely Republican criminals allowed them to prosper, to take annual bonuses like they had in the past, and to extract large sums of bailout money from our government. Those bailouts really pissed off a lot of the people who voted for Donald Trump last Tuesday. Because there were bailouts for banks, but not for the so-called predatory borrowers who were blamed, and millions of people lost their homes in foreclosures. And because Obama didn't pin the blame on his Republican predecessors, by the time Hillary Clinton was running, people had forgotten about most of the details about who caused the economic breakdown, and they wanted to blame Obama. And that lingers. It was transferred to the candidate who accepted his mantle. As a candidate back in 2008, Barack Obama promised that he would renegotiate NAFTA. He never lifted a finger to address the concerns of working-class Americans about the job losses, the offshoring, the outsourcing that were not all directly caused by NAFTA, but were triggered by that trade deal. Then Obama led what we now know to be the fruitless quest for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He negotiated that in secret. Remember the games that were being played? Members of Congress had to go to a room where they were allowed to read it, but they couldn't take notes. They couldn't allow their staff members to see it. And it was such a stinky deal, despite being called the gold standard by Hillary Clinton, that Obama's support for the TPP caused the party, in its platform at the convention last July, to not take a position opposed to the TPP. This gave a great opening to Donald Trump. It underscored that you can't trust Hillary Clinton because she used to support it. Now she says she's opposed to it. And it created more of the concern about her trustworthiness and honesty that dogged her throughout this entire campaign. I also fault Barack Obama for taking Hillary Clinton's advice to intervene in Libya. Now, as you know, I believe that the Benghazi investigation was a political witch hunt, and they missed the real witch, which was the decision to take out Gaddafi in the first place. And that was driven largely by Hillary, by Samantha Power, by Susan Rice, the so-called humanitarian hawks in the administration. And while Obama rebuffed those same people who demanded that he put troops into Syria in 2011 when Hillary was still Secretary of State, what I think was the right move, bad policies, but it was the right move, well, when it came to Libya, Obama's failing is he did take Hillary's advice. Also, the White House allowed the Clintons to openly violate their pledge not to take or solicit contributions to the Clinton Foundation from governments while Hillary was Secretary of State. They brazenly violated that. And there was no effort even to rein them in or shame them about it. This became another sore spot, the self-inflicted wound that I've talked about many times. Also, I think the president was really muted or way too restrained in his reaction to the obscene move by the Republican leadership to not only reject his nominee for the U.S. Supreme Court following the death of Antonin Scalia, but they claimed they could just rudely ignore the entire process because of political benefits the Republicans thought they would get, and they are going to get them. Donald Trump will be able to fill that seat that by rights President Obama should have been at least allowed to have his nominee face confirmation hearings. Likewise, in July, just before the summer recess, the Republicans postured that it was Democratic obstruction preventing the passage of a bill to fund the response to the Zika virus, when it was the Republican poison pill to defund Planned Parenthood in Puerto Rico that was the real reason. Obama didn't fight on those issues. And so, in these cases of extreme obstructionism and intentional deadlock by the Republicans, the Democrats just kind of went on business as usual. And yes, there was the sit-in on the House floor that the Democrats conducted over trying to move gun control legislation. But that was about it. And so coming into this campaign, there were many people who thought Democrats, Republicans, what's the fucking difference? And given a choice of a failed candidate riddled with liabilities like Hillary Clinton, or taking a chance on the unknown of Donald Trump, many people took that chance, enough to get him over the top. And finally, Barack Obama allowed Michigan and Wisconsin to bash unions. Michigan became a right-to-work state, meaning that new unions will be very difficult to organize in the future. And those two states, Michigan and Wisconsin, are where white workers and females, some with a college education, turned on the Democrats and said, what is the difference? These two corporate parties are very similar. And so in the end, Mr. Change and Hope Barack Obama embraced a candidate of the status quo and replaced the hope with fear. The whole basis of the Clinton campaign was Donald Trump is so scary, you can't even think of voting for him. And they believed their own propaganda. And Willie Brown, former mayor of San Francisco, he's got a Sunday column in the local paper here. And he quoted somebody, I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was. But he said, Democrats took Trump literally, but not seriously. Republicans took him seriously, but not literally. So for Republicans, the promise of a wall, it's not critical to them if he actually builds it. It's just a message point, a dramatic way of stating that we've got a problem that hasn't been addressed. And immigration reform is another issue where the Republicans threw up their own brick wall and said no legislation will move from the House. Obama got a pretty sucky immigration bill passed through the Senate, but the House wouldn't touch it. And instead of blaming these issues on the Republicans and educating voters to know that there was a clear difference, the Democrats ended up being perceived as no different from the Republicans, and that creates the moment for a change candidacy. And in a similar vein, Charlie Savage wrote a piece that's in today's New York Times, headlined, Harsher Security Tactics, Obama Left the Door Ajar, and Donald Trump is Knocking. And this is an issue that I've raised repeatedly. Obama has arrogated additional powers to the presidency, the power to use a drone to kill an individual, including American citizens, anywhere in the world without due process, without any court proceedings, without any oversight by Congress. And Donald Trump is likely to use and abuse these powers. Savage writes, over and over, Obama has imposed limits on his use of such powers, but has not closed the door on them. A flexible approach premised on the idea that he and his successors could be trusted to use them prudently. Trump can now sweep away those limits and open the throttle on policies that Obama endorsed as lawful and legitimate for sparing use, like targeted killings and drone strikes and the use of indefinite detention and military tribunals for terrorism suspects. And Savage doesn't cite one of the most onerous bills that Obama had threatened to veto after he sent messages to the Senate demanding that the detention language in the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012 include the passage that would allow an American accused of terrorism to be held at a military base without charge or trial indefinitely. Obama left that on the books. And I think Trump, while he's showing some rhetorical restraint since he claimed the presidency, is not a man of restraint. Savage notes that two decisions by Obama back in 2009 set the tone for his leave-it-on-the-table approach. They involved whether to keep indefinite wartime detentions without trial and continue using military commission prosecutions. He followed a similar course with drones. He ended up issuing a presidential policy guidance in May of 2013 that set stricter limits on the power that he had already used. They include a requirement that the target pose a threat to Americans, not just American interests, and that there would be near certainty of no bystander deaths. But the Obama administration also successfully fought in court to establish that judges would not review the legality of such killing operations, even in the case where an American citizen was the target. Obama went on a tear against leakers, and we have we have Trump now saying he wants to change the libel laws, but Obama locked up people who were accused of leaking to reporters. And he threw the book at people like Chelsea Manning and Ed Snowden for their, I think, morality-based actions. So this is a very serious set of issues. And while it's, we're doing analytics on last week's election, these are issues that are going to be in play for the very near and the very long future. There is no indication of a force on the horizon that would attempt to roll back these presidential powers. And we haven't even touched on surveillance. So in a conference call that was held last week and surfaced over the weekend, Hillary Clinton is blaming the FBI director, among other factors, for her loss. She says that those twin letters from James Comey that were published near the end of the campaign took the momentum out of their campaign, and exit polls show that people who made up their minds in the week before Election Day, 47 shifted to Trump, 42 to Clinton. And it is likely that Jim Comey's actions influenced those final decisions. And as you know, I'm critical of Mr. Comey, but not just for this. I think he is a terrible FBI director, and the agency continues to operate above the law, and this is just another example of that. Trump has not ruled out investigating Hillary Clinton or pursuing charges against her over the email issues and also the Clinton Foundation. On 60 Minutes last night, he seemed pained. He said, gosh, they're nice people. I don't want to hurt Bill and Hillary. And then he said she did some bad things. It's not very precise language, but it is an open question. And Rudy Giuliani, who is rumored to be the top pick for Attorney General, is dancing around it. He said it's been a tradition in our politics to put things behind us. On the other hand, you have to look at how bad was it. So that remains an open question. One of the lead pollsters for the Clinton campaign has said that the obsession with forecasters like Nate Silver and the New York Times Upshot blog have created a kind of what I would call fantasy politics, like fantasy football and fantasy baseball, where people get so wrapped up in trying to accurately predict the outcome that it produces undesirable effects. For example, we saw that on Election Day, the New York Times forecast was that it was an 85% chance that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And that forecast may have led many people to say, oh, I don't need to vote. She's got it in the bag. Now, I also think that this is a two-edged sword, because I believe that the Clinton campaign used these predictions to try to create the false impression that they had a substantial lead in the polls. And the pollster Joel Benenson said, forecasting is not news. It is not journalism. It's not news. And yet journalism is now obsessed with it because it's cheap news. I think he makes a valid point. My friend Norman Solomon, a co-founder of Roots Action and a longtime member of Progressive Democrats of America, has published a piece that I've linked to. It's in the show file for today's podcast at peterbcollins.com, and it's an op-ed published at The Hill. And he says in very simple and direct language that it's time for Donna Brazile to step down as the interim chair of the Democratic National Committee. And I'm linking to it so you can sign that petition if you're so inclined. Now, it's interesting because two leading candidates have surfaced. One is Howard Dean, the former presidential candidate who lost to John Kerry in 2004 in the primary after the Dean scream. That was unfair. And he did serve, I think, credibly as the Democratic National Committee chairman. For several years, he authored the 50-state strategy. But in the past year or so, he's become a highly paid lobbyist for the healthcare industry at a lobby shop in Washington. And I think he damaged his credibility with his support of Hillary Clinton over his fellow Vermonter Bernie Sanders in the primary. And like Hillary Clinton, Howard Dean said, I'd love single payer, but never mind. So I don't think Howard Dean is the right man for this time. But Keith Ellison, the only Muslim serving in Congress, he is, 5 or 6 terms into his career from Minneapolis. He's a man I deeply respect. When I caught up with him at Roots Nation a couple of years ago, he's the only one who would flatly admit that James Clapper, the director of national intelligence, had lied under oath. He was willing to spell it out, L-I-E. That kind of honesty is pretty rare in Washington. And with his progressive politics, his support for Bernie Sanders, his fights at the Platform Committee last summer, I think that Keith Ellison would make an excellent choice. And even Chuck Schumer appears to be supporting this move. I think that's very interesting. There was a bizarre letter to readers posted at the New York Times today. A couple of quotes. When the biggest political story of the year reached a dramatic and unexpected climax late Tuesday night, our newsroom turned on a dime and did what it has done for nearly 2 years, cover the 2016 election with agility and creativity. As we reflect on the momentous result in the months of reporting and polling that preceded it, we aim to rededicate ourselves to the fundamental mission of Times journalism. That is to report America and the world honestly, without fear or favor, striving always to understand and reflect our political perspectives and life experiences in the stories we bring you. You can rely on the New York Times to bring the same fairness, level of scrutiny, the same independence to our coverage of the new president and his team. Now, I take this as an implicit confession that the Times knows that it did tip its hand. And the example I would use is when they lowered their standards to put the word pussy and bitch, quotes from Donald Trump, on the front page of the New York Times. To me, that was just one of many glaring examples of the bias that the newspaper showed. And sure, they published some critical articles of the Clintons even after the nomination was secured. But I think it's pretty clear that they pulled punches. They went easy on Hillary. And that makes this pledge pretty empty, in my opinion. So on 60 Minutes last night, Donald Trump was there. They trotted out Melania and all the kids. What a fine first family we're stuck with. As I mentioned on the day after the election, it's a Kardashian moment. But there's this whole parlor game now of trying to guess what Trump said during the campaign and what it means for his presidency. And we know that he is still firm in appointing a Supreme Court justice to overturn Roe versus Wade, but he doesn't seem morally opposed to abortion. He says, I'm pro-life. But when Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes pointed out that, what's going to happen if the Supreme Court overturns it, he said, well, it'll be left to the states, and, well, they'll have to go to another state. So this is another con job on the conservative Christians who held their noses to support Donald Trump. He's not really trying to ban abortion. He's willing to overturn Roe versus Wade at the federal level. That's quite a distinction. He also has said that same-sex marriage is a settled issue. He's fine with that. He likes certain parts of Obamacare. He doesn't explain how he'll keep the ban on pre-existing conditions, that wouldn't be covered. And the other issue that allows young adults to stay on their parents' plan until age 26. But he still refuses to describe not only what his replacement of Obamacare would be, but how he gets there. And so it's all just left for us to trust him. I don't think we can. He also said that he will continue to tweet because it is so cool and because it's he had a phrase for it. It's a happening thing or something like that. He also said that he won't fire James Comey before he talks to James Comey, the FBI director, but he left that question open by trotting out the kids who said that they will remain running the Trump organization. There's a series, a set of series. Let's see. There is a series of very important questions that need to be asked, because Trump has also placed his adult kids on the transition team. So they are part of the administration. They're going to help pick the people who populate the appointed positions. And then they say that they will have no involvement in government. They're just going to run the Trump organization. They don't need a blind trust. They don't need to divest of any assets. And this is a recipe for disastrous conflicts of interest. And so far, the questions aren't really being asked. Trump has announced that Stephen Bannon will perform the role that Michael Deaver handled in the Reagan administration. Reagan had a White House chief of staff, and then Mike Deaver was this media guy who was also friendly with Nancy, and he stayed in the White House for quite a while. And the Deaver role is going to be played here by Stephen Bannon. He's the guy who has come over from Breitbart. He is the champion of the alt-right, alt-white media. He is considered to be a racist. But in his defense, Kelly Conway said, well, he's got a Harvard business degree. He's a naval officer. He has had success in entertainment. I guess that's Breitbart. And so there is a big protest that is surfacing over this. And the street protests continue across the country in many cities. As long as it's peaceful, I'm completely supportive of that. I think people need to make their voices heard. And I don't buy into this conciliatory approach that he's our president. We all need to just sit down and support him. No, we need to pick and choose. And for example, Donald Trump has said that he is going to abandon Obama's failed policies in Syria and stop trying to take down the Assad government. He's going to focus on vanquishing the Islamic State, and he hopes to align with Russia and Syria to do that. Now, as I've told you, Obama's policies have been incoherent from the get-go. And you got to pick one. You can't confront all of the evils in Syria and expect that simply running bombing raids is going to change them. So, to the extent that Trump does things that I agree with, you'll hear about it. And to the extent that he plugs in people like Reince Priebus as chief of staff and Steve Bannon as his top advisor, well, you'll hear criticism of that from me as well. You remember last summer this Ashley Madison site was exposed and all the users had their data dumped? It's a philanderer site. And one of the things that was discovered is that there were more males looking for women than women looking for guys to philander with by a ratio of like 900 to 1. I mean, it is such a scam. There are far more guys looking to hook up than there are females. But now 40 million members of the adult friend finder site are subject to having their extracurricular activities exposed. Julian Assange held an unusual interview at the Embassy of Ecuador in London today. The questions were prepared by prosecutors from Sweden, but they were posed by a prosecutor from Ecuador. And as the meeting began, Julian Assange's defense lawyer was not permitted in the room. He was tweeting madly to try to achieve that. But this could produce some sort of an end to the asylum situation that Assange has there at the embassy in London. We'll continue to watch that. We're also going to watch what's going on in Israel, because in 2008 at this time, what we saw was, taking advantage of the change of the guard in the United States, the Netanyahu government launched Operation Cast Lead and brutally assaulted the Gaza Strip. Now, so far, we're not seeing any inkling of that. But in the Israeli Knesset, a committee has approved legislation to try to legalize the illegal settlements that have occurred on Palestinian land. Now, there are two types of this. Some are authorized by the government and some are not. But, in my view, illegal is illegal. And it's interesting that the Netanyahu government opposes this move because they believe that Donald Trump is going to be such an ally to them that they don't need to take this step. Even Avigdor Lieberman, the far-right defense minister of the current Netanyahu government, says that this is ill-advised.
I can do anything.
Down in Austin, Texas, a blue dot in a sea of red, Leland Potter and some fellow musicians have put together a little tune here called Grab This Country by the Pussy. Check it out.
Drag her back to where she belongs. Grab this country by the pussy. This is our new freedom song.
Grab This Country by the Pussy. It's by the Rubelators, and I'm linking to the full song at YouTube so you can check it out and watch the video too. There's some clever graphics inserted there. And finally today we have to say goodbye to a honky-tonk piano player who graced many sessions of pop artists over the years, from the Beach Boys to, Frank Sinatra, I think. He was part of the Phil Spector Wrecking Crew, to help to build that so-called wall of sound back in the early 60s. He played on sessions with surf rock bands and also the Byrds' Mr. Tambourine Man. And I'm talking about Oklahoma's Leon Russell. And I got to see him a couple of times in concert, really enjoyed the music that he played, and I am unable, because of music licensing rules, to play his song here right now. But I've linked to one of my favorites in the show file for this podcast. It's called Roll Away the Stone, and I think it captures the essence of Leon Russell. Happy trails, Leon. And thanks to you for listening all the way to the bitter end of my news and comment podcast. You're free to share this, and I hope you will. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.